if our reaction as Jews to anti-Semitism is to revolve around anti-Semitism and to call it out and to expose it, then in a way, we are repeating the same problem. We are filling a void that we as Jews have. And that's far more interesting than the void of the anti-Semite. You know, it's always very important to try and connect the Torah that we're learning to what's going on in the world, what's going on in our lives. And one of the things that we cannot ignore in the current state of events in the world is the unbelievable, unprecedented in recent memory, but very much precedent in history generally, the rise of antisemitism. It's something that is all over the world. It's something that younger people, including myself, people of my generation, have not seen to this degree. Only the older people remember this. For the younger people, it's a feeling of something that they thought only existed in history books, in the stories of their grandparents. It's all coming back. It's in the US campuses all over the United States. It's all over Europe. It's all over the world. We've now recently seen the UN deciding, and particularly this moment in history, in time, to vote to declare the Palestinian Authority, if it should be an official state, an official country, one of the nations, the United Nations, and I don't remember if it's 134, 143 states voted for it, and 25 abstained, and only 9, including ourselves, which is really only 8 more countries, voted against it. And the timing is no coincidence. And it's very, very clear that something that many of us thought was gone or sleeping, very deeply, has awakened in a way that we could not have imagined. And the question is, what do we do with this? How do we understand this? So one thing that I only heard very recently is that it was in 1964 that the Lubavitcher Rebbe was asked, does he think that a second Holocaust can happen? And his answer was, it was 2 words. It was tomorrow morning. That's what he said. And again, during the 60s and 70s and 80s and 90s, and well into this millennium, people would have brushed it away, and they would have said, we're in a different world. For example, we have the UN, which is supposed to take care of this kind of racism from coming back into the world. And it turns out that the UN is one of the moving forces behind this. And it turns out that people don't listen to arguments and they don't listen to the real data. They believe what they want to believe, and they all too easily believe that in the conflict right now in the Middle East, despite everything we know, despite the fact that 18 years ago, we totally came out of the Gaza Strip, that we have given them a real chance, an unbelievable chance to make something out of that piece of land. They could have turned it into paradise. And they used all the time, all the money, all the resources they had to plan the horrible attack that they made on us, and vowing very clearly to do it again and again. And yet people are able to ignore this and to turn it around and to say that we are the genocidal villain in the story and not the other way around. And all the amount of convincing and explaining doesn't seem to help. In fact, it only seems to make things worse. In fact, the people that are speaking for us in the best way are non-Jews, other non-Jews. There are some journalists, there are some Arabs, Israeli Arabs, or Arabs who support us, who know the Arab world, the Muslim world from the inside, the Palestinian world from the inside, and they can vouch for what we've all seen. But we ourselves are very, very much confused. And so I want to address this a little bit. And of course, I want to do this with, Torah eyes and faithful eyes. And I want to understand this in a deeper way and ask the question of how exactly are we supposed to handle and deal and treat this whole surge in anti-Semitism, which appears only to be the beginning of something much, much bigger. I mean, it's not going to sort of disappear over the next few weeks. We'll be seeing each other every week, and my guess is, we can all guess, week after week, it's assuming it's going on at the same pace, and unless a miracle happens, it's only going to get worse. And so we have to brace ourselves, as people say. And bracing ourselves means we have to connect to a deeper perspective, a deeper Jewish, faith-driven, faith-guided perspective on how to deal with things like this that have occurred throughout history, but every generation is a bit taken aback by them, a bit surprised, because no generation experiences them firsthand until it really happens. And then we say, well, we read about it, we heard about it, and wow, unbelievable, it's still here, it's still going on. But every time, it's another opportunity to reconnect in a deeper way to how, as Jews living in the world, having this experience, and more than everything, having in our backpack the book, the library of the Torah, which is really a toolbox equipping us with godly eyes to look at this. So we need to go back to this backpack and to our heritage, our inheritance. And of course, it's not just for Jews, it's for everyone, because many in the world who are not eaten up by anti-Semitism are looking up to the Jews, are looking at the Jews to hear a message, and to get from them also a perspective that they, as non-Jews, who realize that something is very off here, to see how we should all react to this and respond to this in a way that's profound, in a way that's constructive, in a way that doesn't, fall into despair, which is the easiest thing in the world to do. It's the most, obvious, natural thing in the world to do, is when you see such a thing, it's so massive, it's so nearly unanimous, that what can you do? So the easiest thing, the most natural, and I'm speaking on my own, from my own perspective also, the easiest thing is to fall into a kind of despair. And of course, that's the last thing we should do. And in fact, all this is happening in order to challenge us and to teach us not to fall into despair. So it all has to do with going back to adopting a deeper Torah faith-driven perspective. So let's start with a good thing that we can all see that is very directly coming out of the rise of anti-Semitism. And the good thing about this is that it forces many, many, many Jews the world over who have considered themselves, until very recently, citizens of the world, human beings who happen to be of Jewish ethnicity, people who may be connected more or less to their Jewish identity. They have a little bit of their tradition, or their very little tradition, or no tradition. Many Jews the world over are realizing, and they're saying this now, and you can hear this all over the world, I'm realizing now, looking at the demonstrations on the campuses all over the world, that nothing's going to help me. I am first and foremost a Jew. I cannot escape this identity. It's part of me. And they're waking up to this realization. And that's something very, very positive. It's amazing. In fact, it's almost for someone who's teaching Judaism and trying to teach people about, understanding what it means to be a Jew in a deeper way, and has been doing so for my case, 20 years. Other people are doing this for 50 years. For all of us, it's almost a bit frustrating that what we've been working on for years and years, we haven't been able to achieve what October 7th was able to achieve. And this was actually written in the Talmud. In the Talmud, it says that when Achashverosh, the king in the scroll of Esther, the removal of his ring, when he took off his ring to give a stamp of approval for Haman's decree to kill all the Jews, which was this political act, right? The removal of the ring is like the signing of the paper, signing of the decree. This was greater, the act and what it achieved was greater than all the 48 prophets and all the 7 prophetesses, the female prophets, that God gave the Jews. Right? There's a tradition that we have had altogether 48 male prophets and 7 female prophets, actually more, but the main ones. And so this phrase in the Talmud tells us that when he removed the ring, it was greater than all the prophets and prophetesses put together. And that's basically the feeling that we're getting now, is that October 7th and this anti-Semitic, terrible, vile, cruel attack made more of an impact than all of the Torah classes put together. And that goes to show the power of hatred and the power of an actual threat, more than, just words and positive words. And of course, it's not something we need to plan or we need to do, but that's part of how Hashem is running the world. Now, however, all this is just, like the first impression of what's going on. And we could very much be lost in looking at this and focusing on this positive aspect of the rise of anti-Semitism and tell ourselves, well, at least many, many Jews are waking up to the fact that they're Jews is meaningful. It's not meaningless, or it's not something to be just brushed away. It's not something to be neutral about. It's something that you can't escape, and then that you have to face it. And we could look at this positive side and say, well, that's enough. But the thing is that the very thing which I just said is positive, the thing itself, this waking up, also has a negative element to this very fact. What is the negative element? The negative element is that the kind of awakening that we're seeing is a very superficial kind of awakening, unfortunately. And this touches something very profound in the way many Jews, have always dealt with anti-Semitism. And that's something that we need to really address if we want to make the most out of what's going on in the world right now. What's happening is that many Jews are waking up and are coming together and having once again, a feeling of community, but it's all negatively formed around anti-Semitism. That is, they have a feeling that we have a mutual sort of predicament. The predicament is that we're persecuted and hated. And the fact that we have this shared predicament and it brings us together, then this is, that's the whole story. So we are victims of this blind, unexplained, mysterious, absurd, I would say, anti-Semitism, which is in the world, is hatred, irrational hatred of us for who we are, for what we are. And of course, if you have an enemy, then it brings you together, it puts you together. But it puts you together in such a way that all you're doing is talking about your enemy. That's many, many Jews today that are waking up. So it's understandable. It's very much understandable. But it's something that if we only remain in this level, we're sort of I feel we're missing the opportunity. People are coming together to fight anti-Semitism, to complain about anti-Semitism, to show to the world how anti-Semitic everything that's going on is, how history is repeating itself. They're trying to expose it. They're trying to, display it to the world. They're trying to project it back into the world. So in a very ironic way, what's happening here is that this is a fight against anti-Semitism, which revolves around anti-Semitism, and in a very deep way strengthens it and makes it the center, makes it the story. So we can see this in two ways. One, very simple, more direct, and the other one is deeper. So the simple explanation of why it's doing this is that, very simply, the subject of the talk of how we're all now unifying and coming back together, the subject is anti-Semitism itself. That is the center. That is what people are talking about. So they're giving them screen time. There's this famous principle that no publicity is bad publicity. And even if it's all against you, it's for you because it gives you screen time and you're mentioned, you're talked about. And in a very direct way, it strengthens the anti-Semites. They're on the screens, not just their own screens, they're also on all the Jews' screens. And they're the talk of the day, they're the subject of the day. So to a certain degree, this is unavoidable because it's happening, it's news, you can't ignore the news. But on the other hand, by talking only about that all the time, we're strengthening the anti-Semitic story. And now this can actually go farther than just, that being the talk of the day. If you have, there's something called the Anti-Defamation League that was, founded by Jews to expose anti-Semitism. It's been working for years. But the problem with this, and you can really see this, is that there's usually a proportion or a connection between how much you're obsessed with anti-Semitism and how much you're connected to Judaism. And it works in a way that the less you are really connected to Judaism, the less that Judaism is a real driving force in your life, then the more you deal with anti-Semitism. Because it's in a way, that defines you. And that's something that many, many people have pointed out throughout the years. They said, and there was a famous French philosopher, Jean-Paul Sartre, and he said, he gave up on this. This is in the end, by the way, because he had a very, very clever Jewish student who started becoming a Baal Tshuva and coming back to Judaism, and he changed his mind. But for many years, he said, based on his impression from many Jews that he knew that were not religious or connected to tradition in any way, and his impression was that Jews defined themselves based on anti-Semitism, that they see anti-Semitism as the story, and then they feel that they are the opposite side of that, on the opposite side of that, and that their hater defines them. And unfortunately, he was right regarding those people. So in a very big way, what's happening is that the more we deal with it as such, we're in a way strengthening it. And it doesn't help. In fact, it makes it worse. But there is a deeper explanation for why all this is so. So this is something that the Lubavitcher Rebbe once taught, and I think it's very profound. So there's a midrash, there's a story in the Talmud. In fact, it's just before what I just said about Achashverosh and his ring and the fact that it had more of an impact than all the prophets put together. So there's a story about how Achashverosh, right, the Persian king, and Haman, who is the archetypal anti-Semite, how they came together. And it's like a parable. And the parable says this: there were two people, and each one had a field. And one of them, in the middle of the field, he had a mound. And he needed to get rid of the mound. There was extra earth there, and he needed to get rid of it. And the other person also had a field, and he had a ditch in the middle of the field. And his problem was that he needed to fill the ditch. And so it's like a match made in heaven, and then they come together, and each one is willing to pay. But then they realize no one needs to pay anything. The guy with the mound can just give his dirt over to the guy with the ditch, and then all their problems are solved. And the meaning of this parable is that Achashverosh is the man with the mound. Why? His mound is Jews that he doesn't know what to do with. He has Jews, they're foreigners, he doesn't like them, they don't belong to his country, and he's looking for a way to get rid of them. So let's put it this way, and that's what the Rebbe explained. He says this is a kind of anti-Semitism which you can still understand, and in fact it's not so different from general, what we call xenophobia, that is the hatred of foreigners. You have something in your field, you don't like it, it's there, it's a problem for you in some way. It's still anti-Semitic, it's still not a good thing, but you can understand it in a way. He has something there, and he wants to get rid of it. So it's a bad, but it's a kind of bad that you can understand. And in fact, many nations have this, that they don't like foreigners so much. They want to keep their boundaries. It's not, by the way, also particular so much to Jews. It's just, it can be for any kind of foreigner. And in fact, Achashverosh is not the archetypal anti-Semite. Who is? Haman. And this is where we get to the deeper kind of anti-Semitic hatred. And this is the man with the field with the ditch, with the hole. He doesn't have a mound. He doesn't have a problem with the Jews. He has a hole inside his heart. He has a void. He has an emptiness. He's running away from his own problems. He has a terrible relationship with his wife, with his friends, with his ego. All he cares about is how people think of him. He's very profoundly insecure. He's very profoundly not making a true man of himself. He's only thinking about his status and his career, but he's thinking about it in the most superficial, external ways. And the more he goes into this kind of way of life, then the more this void becomes bigger inside of him. And so his anti-Semitic hatred is that he's trying to fill this emptiness within him, and he fills it with hatred. And this is totally what we see today. The many, many, many young students who are now calling themselves pro-Palestinian activists and are going to the demonstrations and the encampments in the campuses, what's motivating them is that they don't have so many Jews that they hate. They haven't experienced, the Palestinian plight and suffering firsthand at all. That's not what the story. The story is that they are children of a generation full of anxieties, full of victim mentality, a very passive generation, and a generation that's desperately seeking to find some meaning in outside of himself, because he doesn't know how to deal with, as Jordan Peterson likes to say, cleaning their own room, making something of themselves. And then they find this ideology, and they latch onto this ideology, and then they fill the void. Now, I'm saying all this not because I want to talk more and more about the anti-Semites, although I do think it's a very interesting understanding, realization, insight. But the thing I'm trying to get at is that if our reaction as Jews to anti-Semitism is to revolve around anti-Semitism and to call it out and to point it out and to expose it and to all of this, then in a way, we are repeating the same problem. We are filling a void that we as Jews have. And that's far more interesting than the void of the anti-Semite. The void of the anti-Semite is interesting. It is interesting to think that hatred is something that you're just using in order to fill a void. Right? The Rebbe says it doesn't make sense that he would fill the void by eradicating a people. Right? It's something weird about the story in the Talmud. There's a mound, and the mound fills your hole, but you want to get rid of the Jews. You don't want to use them to fill. So it's a very strange thing. It's you fill something by eradicating something else. So all of this is very interesting. But it's far more interesting to think about what is the Jewish void? What is the Jewish emptiness? What is the Jewish ditch or space or hole in our own souls that we are trying to fill by running to this topic of anti-Semitism and talking about it and complaining about it and worrying about it and being depressed about it and so on. And so this is something we want to understand. So the question now is, what is this void? And I think it is threefold. It is made up of three things that we've all lost to a certain degree. Some more, some less, some overtly less, some overtly lost it more. Some on the surface don't have this void so much, but if they look into themselves, we can see we also have it. So what is the threefold Jewish void? And we understand this, we can also understand why this whole anti-Semitic wave is rising. It's rising so that we take a look in the mirror and that we see that just like they're filling a void, we're also filling a void and running away from a void. And we need to wake up to that void and fill it. And it has nothing to do with the anti-Semites. They're just one big excuse. They're one big, sort of leverage, historical, political, social leverage that God is using in order to return us, who are Jews or philo-Semitic non-Jews, who, as I said before, are also looking at Judaism and the Torah to learn from, how all this is supposed to teach us something. So what is the threefold void? So the first thing that is making up this void is, of course, very simply, it's losing touch with God. Losing touch with God. And if you are a believer, then you can tell yourself, this isn't my problem, it's someone else's problem. But it doesn't work this way. The Jewish people is one family, it's one organism. And the fact that many, many Jews have lost their faith, it bears upon everyone. And even if you're faithful and you practice Judaism to the how do you call this, to the last dot and jittle or whatever it's called, you still need to reflect upon this, that the Jewish people as a whole have lost their faith in a very, very profound way, and the way they look at history, and the way they look at their own existence, and the way they think about Jewish nationality. God is not there, not in the story. And there's this phrase people use, we each have a God-shaped hole in our hearts. This is a very true thing. There is a God-shaped hole in our hearts. And the anti-Semitic is just there to reflect back to us that we also have this hole. And so they fill it with hatred, and we could fill it with something else. For example, we can fill it with another kind of victim mentality. So for those protesters at the campuses, it's different victim mentality. They feel that they're lost in their screens, or they're lost in a world that whatever has left them this meaningless world. But Jews, we can also develop a victim mentality complex, which is we're persecuted. That's our story, forever and ever. We're persecuted, and this is something we use to fill the fact that God is not in the story anymore. Right now in Israel, in the state of Israel, it's a time that is very much dedicated to what we call the national holidays, right? The secular, founded by seculars, observed by many religious people also. But there is the national holidays. The national holidays are made up of 3 days. The first is the Holocaust Day, which was last week. And then the second one is the Memorial Day for the soldiers, which is in a few minutes. It's coming in. It's tomorrow. And the next day after that is the Independence Day. Now, the way this story is told by the Zionist secular narrative is that it's all connected. It's on purpose. It was put, 1 week apart from the Holocaust Memorial Day to the soldiers dying in Israeli wars Memorial Day and then Independence Day. It was put together with 1 week apart in order to create a very, very clear narrative that the reason the state exists is that it exists to counter anti-Semitism, to counter the Holocaust. That now we it's very clear after the Holocaust that we need a state. So all this is understandable and it makes sense. But the problem is that the way it's taught, and I grew up in the main educational system of the state of Israel, the secular educational system, the way it's told is that it's like this random, absurd, unexplainable, inexplicable hatred that exists in the world and has nothing to do with us or with God or with Judaism. The world, for some reason, sometime in history, it flipped a coin, it did some lottery, and then it decided that these people, the Jewish people, they should be the ones hated the most. And then that's why it's called the oldest hatred. And they need to be hated the most and persecuted for absolutely no reason. There's nothing about the Jewish story that in any way possible, invites or is connected to this kind of hatred. It's completely told from the outside. There's no Jewish, we're just a regular people. We have no connection to God. God is the private thing you can believe or not believe in. We're just a nation, a regular old nation. And for some strange reason, we were chosen to be the scapegoat of all the world, and that's where we're hated. And so what can we do? We need a state. We don't have any mission building this state. We don't have any goal, any divine goal, any transcendent goal. We don't have anything to give to the world. We just want to survive. And we want to survive because we're persecuted. If we weren't persecuted, we would have assimilated. That was our plan 1, plan A. But we can't do it. We can't assimilate. We saw this in the Dreyfus affair and other affairs. And so we moved to plan B. Plan B is we need to have our own state. That's the story. This is a massive story that is completely different from the actual authentic Jewish story of what we are, who we are, why we came into the world, why we have to be in this country and not in other countries, what we're supposed to do in this country. It's not just to build a haven, a safe haven for Jews. It's to build a temple that would give light to the entire world. All this is not part of the story. The only thing that's part of the story is that it starts with anti-Semitism, starts with Holocaust Day, and then that leads to the Independence Day. And it leads to our battles and our soldiers dying and our own sacrifices that we're making, and then we need a state. And the 2 days of the Holocaust Day and the Independence Day are married to each other, 1 week apart, and the anti-Semitism is what creates the contour of the Zionist dream of building this state. And this is a false narrative. It's not a real narrative. It's a narrative that's coming out of the void. Which void? So it starts with the void of God, not having God in the story. So in a way, it's like a black hole meeting a black hole. The anti-Semitism is filling the black hole of the soul of the anti-Semite, that he's not dealing with himself, making something of himself, and then he's running towards this, hating this Jewish people. But the reason he's hating the Jewish people is that the Jewish people symbolize the very opposite of this void. They symbolize having this connection to God, to meaning, to a transcendent meaning, to bringing divine light into the world, to making the world a better place, to rectifying the world. They know what they're doing. They have a mission. And the anti-Semite is jealous. He doesn't have any mission. He has a hole. So he fills the hole with the hatred. But then his hole meets the new hole that the Jews have. And the black hole that the Jews have is that they forgot their own purpose and their own meaning and their own God. And so then it's a black hole, swallowing up another black hole. That's what's happening. That's the narrative that's built on not having a connection to our true story. So that's hole number one. That's the main hole, the first hole. The second hole, it goes together. The second hole is the Torah. For Judaism, God is not just a heavenly Father who loves you and you can pray to and you can lean on. He's also a Father who gives you a legacy. He gives you a book. He gives you a book of laws and a book of guidance and a book of wisdom. And not having this story of who we are, what we are, so I was referring to it already by describing this narrative that says we're just regular people with absolutely no mission in the world other than to survive and be ourselves. The opposite of this is a whole that is pointing at the real story, and the real story is the Torah story. The Torah story is that we do have a mission, and the mission is to find this place that was given to us. It's not ours. It's not our right to have this land. It's our obligation to have this land because we have something to do here. This has to be the center of operation of learning Torah and then teaching Torah to the world. And I want to tell you a little story that when at the very, very early stages of my own sort of Jewish awakening, that I was just beginning to realize that coming out of this narrative that's based on this void of growing up and thinking that my Jewishness is an empty fact. So the beginning of waking up, I wasn't yet, doing tshuva or learning Torah. It wasn't anything like that. It was just the earliest questions that are sort of surfacing. And so I had the dream. And it was a very strange dream. And it took me several days to figure out what the dream meant. The dream was, it starts that many Jews have this dream, the first premise. I was in a concentration camp. Many Jews have this dream because we learned the stories of the concentration camps, and we're full of it since we're very young, and we're filled with these stories. And so the dream started that I'm in a concentration camp. But that's only the beginning. There were two other facts that made it very, very strange. The second fact was that it didn't look like a concentration camp. It looked like the home I grew up in Tel Aviv. It was just the very home that I grew up in, the very house. And yet it was a concentration camp. And I was imprisoned and I was on my way. It was like my days were numbered. And I knew that, I'm on my way to the gas chambers and whatever, but it looked like my parents' house, the house where I grew up in. And then the third fact that made it even more strange was that this place was not populated by other prisoners. It wasn't populated by my family. It was populated by a whole bunch of people that I had met a few years before when I first left Israel to learn art in England. After the army, I went to England to learn art. I was in London and I was in a dormitory with a lot of people from all over the world. And it was a very meaningful experience. I met people from all over the world, and it was very, meaningful for me. I was coming out into the world. And now this is a few years later, and I'm in Israel. I'm studying in Jerusalem. So this dream is that I'm in a concentration camp. It looks like my parents' home, and it's populated by many very friendly non-Jews, not anti-Semitic, that I met, when I was 21 and coming out into the world. And I didn't understand what the dream meant until it clicked. It clicked that these were three circles in which my Jewishness was present, but in a totally negative way. The anti-Semite, the Nazi, hates me, wants to kill me, but I don't know what it means that I'm Jewish. The Jewish secular home that I grew up in Tel Aviv also tells me we're Jewish, but we're secular. What does Jewish mean? It means nothing. It's just an ethnic group. It doesn't have any meaning. So we're secular Jews. We're against religion. We don't like religion. We don't like the Torah. And so our identity is based on rejecting something that I didn't understand what it was, which was real Judaism, Torah Judaism. So it was anti-Semitism. It was secular Judaism, which also defines me from the outside. And there's a black hole. And then finally, all the very nice non-Jews that I met in England, it was just the other nations, other people. Not anti-Semitic, just other people that, again, I looked at them and I said, whoa, they're, French and German and African and Indian. And what am I? I'm a Jew. What does it mean? And so I realized that dream was like a puzzle with a central piece missing. And the central piece missing was, what is Judaism? What does it mean? What is the story? And of course, the story is the Torah. There's no Jewish story without the Torah story. You can't understand the Jewish story without the Torah story. So anti-Semitic hatred and the rise of anti-Semitism, it's based on a void. It confronts us with our own void. And our own void is first having lost connection with Hashem, and also having lost to a certain degree, to a major degree, a connection with the Torah that Hashem gave us. And that is the only way to make sense of who we are, what we are, and more important than anything else, what our purpose in the world is. So this is the second part of the threefold void. What is the third part? The third part is, this is based on the Zohar. The Zohar says that there are three things that are intimately, inextricably connected. You can't take them apart. You can't put them apart, which is God and the Torah and Israel. Israel is the Jewish people, the Jewish souls, the family of Jewish souls all together. And this entity called Israel, which even if you're a non-Jew, but you're connected to the Torah, you have this in you. It's part of you, especially if you're considering or going for conversion. It's part of you. But even if you're not, if you're connected, it's part of this. So it's embodied in the Jewish people, and it spreads to anyone who is learning Torah. So there's God and the Torah and this entity, this spiritual entity called Israel, Knesset Israel. So what is this void? This void is the disconnect from other Jews, not being able to understand them. And this is, in a way, the most important lesson to be learned from anti-Semitism. That anti-Semitism is rising, but it's rising in order so that we look into our hearts and into our void. But ultimately, it's more than God, more than the Torah. It's how we relate to other Jews. Including, by the way, the Jews that all they can think about is anti-Semitism. They don't think about the Torah, which is usually the more secular Jews. As a religious Jew, you have to think about the secular Jews and bridge that gap, bridge that void, try to understand them, try and figure them out, empathize with them, understand them, feel for them. Of course, the other way around also. That's what I've been talking about, that it's up to the Jews who are experiencing this anti-Semitic wave to go and ask themselves, so what is the Jewish story more than the fact that it's just my destiny, to be here? Just one more thing about like the Torah and God before going saying one more thing about this inner distance between Jews is that Rav Soloveitchik, the Rabbi Meir Soloveitchik, he has a very important essay that he wrote. That he said two things unite Jews on two levels, and he called it Brit Goral, which is the covenant of destiny. We have a shared destiny. Mainly, or to a large degree, has to do with being persecuted. But there's also a Brit Ye'ud, a covenant of shared goal, shared calling. It's not just a better translation would be, I haven't looked it up the way it was in English, but I would say the first one is maybe a shared predicament. That's the Brit Goral. And then there's a shared, maybe for this it's better to use destiny. Like as destiny is in something that we're supposed to do. There's a calling, there's a mission that we have, a shared mission. So let's just use shared predicament and shared mission. Again, not have it looked up the way it is in English. In Hebrew it's Brit Goral and Brit Ye'ud. Ye'ud is calling or mission. So he says on the simple level is that we have a shared predicament. Our shared predicament is that we're all persecuted and that we're tumbling through history together. But on a higher level, we have a shared goal that's not past-oriented, it's future-oriented. And it's not negatively defined by, having a shared experience. It's positively defined in the sense that there's an actual thing defining it, which is the Torah and the commandments and the goal of bringing divine light into the world, rectifying the world, making the world more godly, more divine, more full of light, and full of divine consciousness. And this is, so when I'm talking about the whole is that we only have the experience of a shared predicament vis-a-vis anti-Semites. So going back to God and the Torah is going back to the shared goal. But now we get to the third element. The third element, as I said, is distance from another Jew. And here I want to say something beautiful that I just heard very recently from my friend and teacher, Rabbi Moshe Genuth, that some of you know. Last week was the yortzeit of the Vitebske Rebbe. Vitebske Rebbe was in a way the first Rebbe, the first Hasidic Rebbe of Eretz Israel, of the land of Israel. Why? Because he fulfilled the unfulfilled dream of the Baal Shem Tov to come to make Aliyah and to come to the land of Israel. The Baal Shem Tov tried but failed, and he saw this as a sign that he's not meant to at that time, but he wanted to very much. But 2 generations later, third generation of Chassidut, the Vitebske Rebbe, Rabbi Menachem Mendel of Vitebsk, he fulfilled this dream alongside 300 families. It was the first Aliyah, the first wave of emigration to the land of Israel, before the students of the Vilna Gaon and before the Zionist waves of immigration. So, in his yortzeit, Rabbi Genuth said the following, and in the Talmud it says that when the Babylonian exile ended, it was a 70-year exile, and the Jews came back. It was after 70 years after the destruction of the first temple. And then the Talmud says, in the Tractate Sanhedrin, the Talmud says that when they came, so the verse says, in Nehemiah, the verse says that they all cried, that a big cry. So the Talmud asks, why did they cry about? And the Talmud explains that they cried because they felt that there's no point building a second temple. Why? Because they felt that the evil inclination that caused the first destruction is still alive and well. What was the evil inclination? It was the evil inclination to do idol worship. We don't have that inclination so much anymore, but it used to be a very strong drive. And that's what caused the destruction of the first temple. That's our tradition, is that what caused the destruction of the first temple is that many, many Jews wanted to serve false idols. And so it was destroyed, they came to the Babylonian exile, they came back. And then they looked into their hearts and they said, this devil, this evil inclination that wants to pursue other idol worship, activities and to follow in their ways, it's still among us. And the term that it was used, that it still dances among us, like a little devil that's dancing within us, among us. This thing is still dancing among us. And now they get rid of this, and they built the second temple. But the second temple ultimately was also destroyed, but this time for another reason. What was the second? This reason? It wasn't the idolatrous inclination anymore. This time it was sinat chinam, senseless hatred, not being able to understand the other Jew, not being able to appreciate and respect the other Jew, and that caused the destruction of the second temple. 2,000 years on, can we say that we got rid of this inclination of this new devil? We did get rid of the devil of idol worship. We don't have this drive so much, but we do still have the senseless hatred, the sinat chinam. So in a way, we are coming back to the land of Israel over the past 100 years, and we can cry just like they cried. The same devil that caused the destruction of the previous temple is 2,000 years on, not 70. 2,000 years on, it's still around. It's still dancing among us. The Holocaust came after the Jews were totally divided between Eastern European and Western European, and between Hasidim and non-Hasidim. And October 7th happened after we were divided in a way we were never before in this country, between the left and the right, and the religious and the non-religious. And then this void is used in the most direct way possible by anti-Semitism. So if you want a sign that the reason anti-Semitism is here is in order to point us, our own eyes, into the direction of our own voids, our own emptiness, and that we need to heal this wound and heal this, hole that's within us. And you don't need to look any farther than October 7th itself and what happened there, because they were using the actual, in a very clear way, they were using the fact that we were torn in between us with this senseless hatred, with this lack of empathy, with this lack of genuine attempt to understand one another. They use this vulnerability to attack us. So you don't need, it's not a symbolic thing anymore. It's not like I'm making this very symbolic class about their void and our void and their emptiness and our emptiness. Here you see a causal connection between our void and this void of hatred, this bottomless well of hatred called anti-Semitism. You can see that it's going, one is connected to the other. So, just like, in a way, that there are two kinds of anti-Semitism, there's the less bad one, which is symbolized by Ahasuerus, who has a mound. He has an actual problem with the Jews, and he wants to get rid of them. And then there's a worse kind, the archetypal, emptiness-driven, void-driven anti-Semitism, which is personified by Haman. So too, there are two ways to deal with anti-Semitism. And one of them comes from our own emptiness, and that's the bad way of dealing with anti-Semitism. And the other one comes from a sense of fullness, not emptiness. Being filled with what? Being filled again with looking for Hashem. We don't have to be fully, have full faith in Hashem, but we need to look for Hashem and ask for Him and seek His face and, ask for Him to be revealed and try to remember and try to figure out what His story is, what the story of Emunah is, faith in Hashem. And then we have to fill this void by reconnecting with the Torah and learning the Torah. And it's very hard. It's very hard to, go over the boundaries and the fences and the walls that are between us and the Torah. It's very hard to go over them because it's very hard to learn Torah. It's just very hard. But we have to try, find our way, find the book that talk to us, find the teachers that talk to us, and cross this chasm, because this chasm is within us. And finally, and it's all connected, is bridging the chasm between us and the other Jew, the other group, the Jew that is unlike us, that doesn't think like us, that wants something else from us, and figuring him out. And all these three things help one another, because if we remember God, we remember we all came from God. All different Jewish souls, all different souls in the world. But it starts in your own people. You have to look at the people around you and figure out that the one that you don't like, you have to break your head and break your heart open until you can figure him out and not alienate him and not see him as just totally crazy or wicked or senseless, or that you have zero empathy for him. And working on this empathy is filling that void. And so believing in Hashem helps you, because you remember that Hashem created all of us in His image. And also learning Torah helps with understanding the other Jew, because if you really learn Torah, the Torah forces you to adopt multiple perspectives. The Torah has 70 facets which correspond to the 70 soul roots of the Jewish people. And so we have to remember that all Jews, all souls in the world are looking for redemption. They're just looking at different aspects of the same redemption. The religious Jew, he wants the past and the Torah and the tradition and the Jewish identity. The secular Jew, he wants the future. He wants the connection with other people. He wants the universality, not the particularity. He wants something practical, not just traditional. And we're all in this together, and it's all very valuable. And the solution is realizing that every group within the Jewish people is looking for something very, very valuable, very precious. We have to put together and see together. And so one last thing to finish, to round all this up, is that I mentioned the Vitebsky Rebbe. He's the first, as I said, the first Hasidic Rebbe of the Holy Land, of the land of Israel. So, as I said, now we're in the time talking about, referring to the founding of the state of Israel, to the coming back of the Jewish people to the land of Israel, whether you actually came back and you live here, or you know that this country is waiting for you, and you know there's a Jewish state here, and you think about all of this, then in a way, we have to go back to the first narrative. The first narrative is not the superficial, secular Zionist narrative, which is just talking about, as I said before, just the Jewish nationality, just the predicament of Jews, and not the future transcendent-oriented goal or calling of Judaism. It's only talking about the predicament, and this story doesn't lead you anywhere. It just tells you that you're the protagonist of a tragedy, and the solution to this tragedy is to have a Jewish state and a Jewish army. It's not very uplifting, and it doesn't solve any of the problems, and it's going to cause you to even, that's a subject for another class, it's going to cause you to, even the way you wage the war is constant apologetic explanation of trying to please other peoples and other nations and their perspective, and you're not going to fight in a proper way, and you're going to prolong the fight, and you're going to increase the number of soldiers dying. God forbid, but it's happening. So it's a story this is a topic for another class. But the point is that the narrative that it's just a predicament, it's just a tragedy, it doesn't lead you anywhere. So we have to go back to the first Hasidic Rebbe of the land of Israel, whose yahrzeit is Aleph Iyar, very close to Hey Iyar, the 5th day of Iyar, which is the day of independence, very close. And it's also a day in which all Jews say Hallel. There's an argument whether some people think you should say Hallel on the 5th of Iyar. And many people strongly disagree with this. But everyone says Hallel on the 1st day of Iyar, which is the yahrzeit of the Vitebsky Rebbe. So if we're focusing on that day, then maybe there's the key to this time coming back to the land of Israel and getting rid of the devil that's dancing among us, which is what the people coming from the Babylonian exile, that's why they prayed, that we get rid of this devil. And they did get rid of the devil. We don't have the Yetzer of Avodah Zarah anymore, that inclination. So we have to do the same. We have to go back to this Rebbe, the Vitebsky Rebbe in a way, and his message, and use this message to get rid of our own problem, which our own problem is this senseless hatred. And what was his message? His message was that once he came to the land of Israel, to the Holy Land, he started signing all his letters, Hashafal be'emet, the truly lowly. That's what he said. He felt beneath everyone around him. And this feeling of lowliness, which is the main message of the Vitebsky Rebbe, is what we need now, what we need right now. There's a beautiful image that says that if you want to lift something up, it's like a forklift. What does a forklift do? A forklift goes under the pile of crates, or whatever it is that it needs to lift. It goes under all of them, and then it can lift all of them upwards. If we want to raise our own stature and our own story and fill our own void and go back to God, and go back to the Torah, go back to the fellow Jews, we need this forklift. And this forklift, it goes all the way down. It's this lowliness that the Vitebsky Rebbe taught us. And we have to look at other Jews, and the first question we have to ask is, what can I learn from this Jew? What is the element of truth that he's holding on to, that I don't hold on to so much, and that I need to learn from him? Is afterwards, part of your lowliness is also accepting yourself and your own views. You don't need to be, without your personality, without a character, and just totally silent. It's not a passive thing. It's not negation. You're not negating yourself. You're just coming very humbly and learning from everyone. And then you can understand the left, you can understand the right, you can understand the secular, you can understand the religious, you can understand all of them. And you want to learn from all of them. And then if you're very, very lowly in a positive way, then you also want to then integrate all of it, because you're also lowly towards God and the Torah, not just towards other Jews. It's the threefold void. And then you learn the Torah, and you look for the 70 facets that you saw in the other Jews, and then you see how all these facets come from the one God, and his infinite truth, which is multifaceted. And then the void starts filling. And that's the only reason that there are anti-Semites in the world. That's the only real reason. The emptiness in their hearts, it's a very sad thing, But for us, it's just a reflection of another emptiness, and we need to feel this emptiness. And if we feel the emptiness within us, then this whole anti-Semitic thing will either go away, or we won't care about it anymore, or it'll be just totally, powerless to do anything in the world, and truth will come out, and truth will be victorious. Hi everyone, this is just a quick postscript to the class. I just wanted to clarify that everything I said here is not meant to diminish in any way, shape, or form from the incredible work done the world over by many people to battle anti-Semitism. Clearly, the falsehoods being disseminated need to be answered, and the anti-Semitic violence needs to be stopped. What I was trying to say is that if, as Jews, that is all we do, if we settle for that, then we are missing the deeper lesson to be learned from anti-Semitism, which is that it is a wake-up call for us to truly reclaim our heritage. I hope this point is now clear. This video was made possible through the kind support of my sponsors over at Patreon. Patreon is a great way to help independent creators like myself produce original content. If you'd like to get more English language videos from me, please consider becoming a supporter via Patreon. You can find the link in the description below. Thank you very much.